7.
Things that are bailed on. So.
Good afternoon. We have someone in, I think. Okay. Good afternoon. We are going to call the regular meeting of the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority to order. We still have people showing up. Present, we have Commissioner Jacob Anderson on the Washington side, Commissioner Marla Keeler, and Seth Gilchrist will be sitting in for Ben. And then we also have on the Washington side, alternate Eric Wilson. On the Oregon side, Commissioner Fox. We also have Commissioner Polson and we have our alternate stepping in for the first time as well.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Big votes today.
And, oh, and then online, we have alternate Thomas. Have we heard from Ben?
Ben cannot make.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And we heard from Don? All right. Okay, we will move on to the agenda. We have one modification to the agenda. We are going to move up the Kiewit interim notice to proceed to the new business, and then what else?
Presentation.
And then we're going to be doing a presentation of the scope under the communications and government relations. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Approve the agenda as modified.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, we will move into public comment. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. We would, oh, we do have the minutes. We will go back up and approve the minutes from March 11th, 2024. Are there any changes to the minutes? Not seeing any. I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve the minutes of March the 11th.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Now we will move into public comment. Is there anyone who would like to provide public comment to the Bi-State Bridge Authority? If you are online, raise your hand. If you're on your phone, *6. If you're in the room, I wish you were here. I'm not seeing anyone. Going one more time. Oh, we must be doing everything right if nobody's online. Okay, we will close public comment. We will move into executive reports, co-chair's report. Commissioner Fox, do you have anything?
No, not at this time. We canceled last, I'm sorry, that's the engineering report. No, I don't have anything.
Okay, and I don't have anything as well, other than I can just mention Senator King told me that the $1 million that was put in for the walking path on the Washington side was actually included in the budget. It was just included under the climate commitment funds, which we won't know if there is even a climate commitment until after the election. So right now it's there, and hopefully we can move forward with those dollars. But I had no idea that it was even included. So we'll move on to our project director bridge update.
All right, government affairs update. We've got a meeting on April the 3rd, a Wednesday, as kind of a kickoff meeting for the government relations outreach for this next year. Some of the key points are going to be presenting about the PDB being under contract, just showing progress more than anything, the federal funding, where we are with TIFIA, that will finalize the design criteria that'll come out of phase 1A. We will also finalize our alternative out of phase 1A. And then we'll also have a confirmation of the bridge cost coming out of phase 1A. We're also going to identify and map out key races and potential changes that will be needed to address in our outreach, the strategy and relationship mapping between the authority and the key members, and then develop a meeting schedule for the key members as well as key committees. And then a in-person visit sometime in August or September. Federal, there's not a lot there. On the funding side with Oregon, we are starting the application for the infrastructure bank loan. And that will get submitted back to Oregon. House Bill 5201 did pass, which converted the recipient for the $20 million lottery bond over to the Bridge Authority, which allows us to put the infrastructure bank loan name in the Bridge Authority. We still have the BIP grants, no changes there. On the grants, we have a meeting on March 28th, this Thursday in the morning, where we will finalize and review the scope of each grant with the feds and make sure we're clear on where we're going to be spending the money and that's clear to them on how we're going to spend the money with our different grant sources. We'll talk about some finalization of some of the terms of the agreement. We also on Friday sent a request out to FHWA requesting that any money that we spend prior to the grant agreements getting finalized, that be counted as reimbursement or be reimbursable by the federal loans when we get the grant agreements. And we also requested that it count as match before we have the grant agreement. So we sent that on Friday. We'll have a follow-up discussion with them if we don't hear anything before Thursday and follow up with them on that. So we also had a lot of things happen with the tribes on Friday. I had a couple phone calls with the Yakima Nation. We have a meeting in person with them tentatively on May the 8th, where we will cover the treaty MOA, the aesthetics, and the on the project. They had some changes to their leadership staff and thought it would be good to come back and give them some updates. So that will be in person at Toppenish. I think I said that right.
That's May the 8th.
May the 8th.
Okay, but I need to send a
Okay,
invite.
I'll get an invite out. It's a hold right now, but I'll get that out. Nez Perce, FHWA legal has been talking to Nez Perce's legal. They are looking at May 7th as potentially the meeting for that meeting with Nez Perce, which would probably be at Nez Perce's place. So we may be going to Nez Perce on the 7th and Yakima on the 8th.
That's Sunday, you know.
The 7th?
May.
May.
It's not.
Okay.
That was.
And then Umatilla, this week I'll be sending back responses to their, they sent us some terms on their projected funding. We're going to send some questions back as to how they developed that. And then I would anticipate that coming probably back to the Finance Committee board and the board. I'm hoping in the next month for some discussions, but we need to work through some details with FHWA, ODOT, and the tribe first, and then we can bring that back to the board for some discussion. And then Warm Springs, FHWA is waiting on them to confirm a date. They're supposed to be on their next council meeting, but we're waiting on which day and what time. So a lot of things with the tribes. Like I said, all that was on Friday. So I don't know, they all had a lot to do on Friday, or we're still on Friday. Biological opinion, emailed Cindy Callahan this morning with FHWA. NIMS has received their comments back from their general counsel. They said that they were not extensive, so they are incorporating those comments. Cindy will be checking back with them at the end of the week. They are also incorporating the comments that we provided them. When that's done, then it'll go to signature. So she's going to check on Friday to see if they've gotten everything revised. So I'll let you know next week what happened. So
Well, that's the next really big milestone for this project.
Yeah.
You can get that damn thing signed.
it would be huge to get that, at least one piece of that signed. And then we had two presentations, one last week on the 14th to what's called the old timers, and that's not offensive because that's what they call themselves. It is retired members of the Army Corps of Engineers. Really cool group. So I did a presentation with them, and then on the 21st, I did a presentation with the Rotary Club here in Hood River. So. And that's it.
Okay,
Have you presented to the White Salmon Rotary Club?
I did, yes, last year sometime. So it probably wouldn't be bad to, I was thinking if it's all right with the board, reaching out to a couple groups, the Rotary, the cities. I have not been to the cities for a while, so it may not be a bad thing to go
Yes.
back and present to the cities and just give them an update as well. So may try to do that in the next couple months.
okay, let the record show Commissioner Gibson is now present. We will move into, did you hit all the action items, the open action items?
Down here?
The open action items.
Yes, it was about, yeah. Well,
Okay, we will move on to legal report. Mark and Judy, are you both there?
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I gave the meeting last month, right? I mean, last meeting.
Yeah. Sorry
Yes,
about that. It says
That's
it's for the
okay.
first meeting. That was my mistake. Judy.
that's okay.
Okay, we can move on to the consent agenda. We have invoice approval and janitorial services contract. I would entertain a motion.
I move to approve the consent agenda items, pay the invoices, for, yeah, I guess it's, if I remember
the
right,
printer.
yeah, the printer and then the janitorial service contract as in the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, we will move on to the engineering and construction update.
Yeah, we actually, canceled our meeting last week. Because we were tied up with other things. Do you want to give a little bit of a brief on the aesthetics?
Sure, and I think Jessica's got some on it too. So we did have our aesthetics meeting in Hood River last Wednesday.
We have yeah.
And we've had roughly 24 members of the committee, about 30 people in the room, walk through our exercise. I had kind of 3 high-level takeaways that I did. There's a lot of ideas, and when we finished up, I think the big thing is the committee's starting to get engaged. They wanted another meeting to make sure that we kind of categorized what they had talked about. So we're doing that as a combined meeting on next Thursday, Thursday. And that'll hopefully kind of narrow in, and then we'll be ready for the public event.
What's the key messages you're seeing?
Well, so the 3 things that I kind of take away, we've got one individual that's really kind of pushing on kind of an iconic bridge idea. But we've got a number of individuals that started to really come around to, no, this bridge is really, and I kind of go to an abstract, it's a link between one community. It ties one community together rather than creating a defining moment of moving from one to another. I think that's a really strong conceptual idea that the group is, I think, grabbed onto, and it starts to reinforce the idea of a simple bridge that really does what it does well, and not something that needs to be overbuilt or something like that. So that was one of those ideas. The other was, and it reinforces the same thing, is truth in materials. There was a strong preference that if you're using concrete, it ought to look like concrete. If you're using steel, it ought to look like steel. So that again is another kind of honesty in materials, honesty in how you construct the bridge. And I think those ideals as a broader arching piece start to lead to really the the mystery of why is EC2 the preferred concept, and they started to fill that a little with the community. So we'll keep going with there. Public processes are a little bit loose like that. You kind of got to roll with it until you start to get some consensus. Sometimes it happens more quickly, sometimes less. We did come up with a theme that I think resonated really well of just natural elements, kind of geography, water, mountains, so forth. Those 4 items that really drop. So you gotta shake it up in the box and see what starts to fall out.
Haven't started talking about railing or barriers.
We did talk a lot about them in the abstract, about how hard do they need to be, what do they need to be made of, what do they need to do? They need to prevent somebody from climbing over? Do they just need to be a barrier? Do they need to block wind? So it's kind of exciting. It's a group that we can kind of get into what an object or an element needs to do, and then how do you start to translate that into what is it?
There was a pretty strong consensus also that lighting should be minimal and that dark sky was very important. So I think that's good.
Yeah. Other than the iconic bridge, I don't think there are any real left field kind of ideas out there. So that's a cohesive community.
Well, that's what we've been, broadcasting for the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Catherine,
A quick question, Eric. We got that email. I think everyone received the email about that tram idea. Is that something, I mean, is that sort of out of left field, or what was the response there?
I haven't heard that come up in the aesthetics meeting. I know the idea is out there in the community and there's several people talking about it, but it has not come up to my knowledge in the aesthetics committee. And I know that because I have a buddy that's pushing.
Well, yeah, I got the email and I didn't know if that individual who sent the email was part of the aesthetics committee. That was what I was asking.
I'm sorry, I missed the first comment there.
I'm pretty sure we all got the email, right? With the
Yeah.
pictures and stuff. Okay, so I'm just bringing that to making sure we're at least discussing. I didn't know if that was part of the aesthetics committee and that was a follow-up, or I just wanted to kind of get clarity about that if at all needed.
Yeah, isn't the gentleman on the aesthetics committee?
I think he was, he hadn't brought it up, but he was at the meeting. He didn't bring it up at the meeting, so.
He is, but it did not come up in our conversations today. And I just noted that we need to follow up. Because we also can't respond, like we need to respond only to him and clarify also just the chamber of communications.
He sent the
So
people, I think.
Yeah.
And some of those things are like what he was suggesting is not something that really even would affect the job. That could be something that the community would do after.
Yeah, sure. Okay,
It wouldn't have
it's
to be-
funicular.
Yeah, I mean, it just, when you can't make them work in big cities, it makes it difficult to work when you don't have the ridership to support it, but it could be done, The bridge wouldn't prevent it from being done. If that.
It's funny, just off the cuff, but one idea from some residents, this has come forward in White Salmon, we're not currently pursuing it, but was to have as cars move into automation, like have a route that would be an automated car route that would bring people up dock grade. So we're not pursuing it because it means to sacrifice an essential travel route for just this like automated car, but it is that same idea and could do a full loop. But
Technology is changing so fast.
yeah,
10 years from now, you're not going to need anything buried in the concrete.
Yeah, it's gonna be off the car. You gotta put guardrails on dock grade before you do that, though.
yeah.
If it goes haywire, it's a long trip down.
You don't need that.
Yeah, sure.
we're getting a little off topic now. So I'm gonna bring us back using my prerogative. Do we have anything else for the engineering committee?
Yeah, just that on the 10th, we're going to be attending some meetings with Kiewit and HRWSBA. There's a brainstorm session that you're invited as well to start talking big picture, different materials and so on for the bridge. Option.
And that'll be part of the reason for we'll talk about later, it's the LMTP.
Okay,
Sorry, just on the bridge aesthetic side, the open house, April 17th, is there an additional meeting of the committee before that open house, or what does between now and then look like for the preparation and what's going to the public?
Question first. Yes, there is another meeting.
Good.
I have a hybrid meeting on next Thursday, and that'll be here and online. And the primary function of that meeting is really to pare back what we heard in the first workshop, so that group is comfortable with where we've been. That was at the group's request.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
And we will be taking what we heard from them at that workshop and massaging it a bit to make it like kind of get it closer to where we're going with the memo. And so we want to make sure that they can see their feedback reflected and see where we're going before we go to the public at the meeting on the 17th.
can we talk a little bit more about the meeting on the 17th? Are you gonna have, I mean, it's public, it's open, are you having things on the wall? What's that gonna look like? So if you guys haven't started talking about, what the designs are, probably people I would assume are gonna want to show up and say, okay, what are you looking at for railing and what are you looking at for these things? So
It will not be that far advanced. It'll be examples of things that we're talking about and materials from that first workshop. Hopefully condensing that down. What the actual elements are, we haven't gotten there yet, but it'll be a derivative of that first workshop and the summary discussion. And I fully expect we're gonna be on the phone for that and have some new ideas to come out of that discussion as well.
Public workshop in May, right? Open house in May.
It will be down to.
Oh, and do you want to talk about, get to what Jake is asking, what's coming out of the aesthetics committee is not specifics to, we want this rail, this light post, this whatever. It is a memo of guidelines that the contractor and engineers will take into account. But it's not dictating, we want these lights, we want these rails, we want these colors, we want this. It's more of a theme of ideas.
That's my idea. I think the group has kind of dialed in on that. And I guess I would add one other group to that, and that'll be the bridge authority. This memo as well. So we've got contractor, designers, bridge authority. That's the trifecta that needs to make final decisions. And then that memo should inform all three of those groups to make those decisions.
And part of that is because the contractor, depending on what they end up designing, has to be able to integrate options into the design. So they need to be able to make that decision of how they integrate it into the design. And because you like a certain one may or may not work with what the design is. And rather than going back and forth and picking this light pole or that pipe pole or this light pole, if you can get them to do a theme and then a designer can get as close to that as possible. And then maybe bring one or two ideas back to the authority to say, hey, here's the two ideas we can do. Here was the theme they identified.
Reinforce the theme,
right,
with different elements.
Yeah. So,
and I guess the one thing I kind of push back on again is don't think of the different elements in isolation. They all need to work together and they considered as a whole.
You don't want blue light poles and drain something else. And
whatever the issue is, but there's a continuity of that whole element there to be considered. So,
if I may, are you guys prefacing those conversations with the fact that we're trying to build this to specs that meet the state of Washington, state of Oregon, federal? Okay, so
part of the reason, and
understand a little bit that there are, I don't want to say guardrails because we're talking about guardrails, but there are some, curbs to the street a little bit and to where that, I just want to make sure that people aren't missing that. It feels like that's a very important point to point out. You know, we don't know what all those things are exactly yet, but just know that, you know, people sort of understand that at some point we will need to take all of this and see if it fits in that box. And if it doesn't, some of that stuff goes away. Sorry.
Well, and there may be things brought to the authority, and I think this is a good point for you all to think about. There may be things that we bring to you that are like, you can do this, but here's your risk and the liability you're opening up the authority to. Right. And I think those are things that you guys will have to weigh in on, is that you can do them. Is it the risk you want to take on and liability you want to take on, either a maintenance or safety or whatever, if it doesn't meet a certain criteria?
I just want to make sure those are, you know, top of mind. That's something you bring people back around to each time you're talking about.
I believe we've been real cautious about kind of prefacing the conversation and the extent of it, and that these are really recommendations, and final decisions will have a whole lot more
Consideration.
research and rigor behind them for all sorts of different reasons. Just there's not enough time to go into it. I would be curious if anybody's would be the resonates. I think I'm saying it clearly, but so if anybody has any feedback, I'd be welcome to hear it.
If I may, a great way to do that is you've been asked to do this other meeting to sort of bring back all those ideas. Just ask those folks to basically give a summation of what they think it is you told them. Yeah. I mean, it's an exercise that's worth, you know, if this is a small group, not in a public setting, but in this kind of group where you have a relationship with that group of people and you've had a couple of meetings with them, it's just simply ask them, you know, make sure that you are on the same page and that they get what you're picking up, what you're putting down, as it were.
That's a good suggestion, and that it's a conversation. So
yeah, totally. And that's an easy thing to work into
continuing.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to make sure got addressed, kind of, you know, talking about all these pieces of infrastructure and whatnot, is the tolling infrastructure. Just to make sure that there's a discussion somewhere in there about the aesthetics of what they want to see for tolling. And I'm not sure we're going to have a whole lot of choices. I mean, we were just talking about it in the finance meeting last week, but I'm sure having some guidelines around it would be helpful.
What's the camera that takes pictures?
Well, I mean, you can imagine, do you want overhead tolling? Do you want things under a cover? Do you want it all in the ground? What do the lights look like? Or, you know, these
Gantries, a lot of times rental agencies become their signature.
Yeah.
And you can spend as much money as you want to on a gantry. It does the same thing as a cheap monotube that holds the equipment.
Or as little as you want.
You don't say you can. So, but a lot of agencies will put a lot of time and effort into designing a gantry that has a signature look to it.
Sort of the equivalent of the toll house.
Yeah.
So it's great to hear that the committee is coming together and understanding their position. I guess my concern is going to be when we go out to the public, what is the public's expectations of coming in, and how are we going to be able to make sure that they're not coming in thinking that they're going to get to choose or impact your choices on what we're building?
Well, I think a lot of that outreach has already been out there. I mean, there's an infographic out right now. It's the public message reinforced on what this committee is and what they're not. And a lot of that is the ongoing active interaction with the public and, you know, how we are all relaying it when it's asked of us, but also more importantly around these facing events and how it's communicated.
But if we do have ideas that come from the public that have, I mean, we're 25 minds, 30 minds. If there are more ideas out there, that's by all means, we can integrate them at this point. Whether they carry all the way through or not, that's something for the future. And the event on the 17th is an open house. So it won't have a lot of structure. It'll have images and some of the work that the committee has done and facilitators there to talk about it. Hopefully it will have a number of the committee members there to talk about it, but it won't. There's not a structured presentation. This is what it is. It's really a finding more additional input. When we get to the second one, that's going to have to be narrowing it down a little more.
Okay, anything else? All right, moving on, communications and government relations.
So I think most of our time we're going to use to walk through kind of the internal document that's ready for really the full commissioner input on the public involvement plan through phase 1A. Mike already touched on a few key points, but again, just reinforcing, this has popped up on occasion in meetings since the start of the year, but certainly the government relations plan for 2025 has always been on our radar, and we are having a meeting in the coming weeks. This is the appropriate time to start more fine tuning what that looks like for next year's session, but also, as was mentioned, typical for how we've been treating this project in recent years, we will once again be reaching out and having conversations, most likely both chairs and another commissioner, with state representatives and senators in the off season, just to kind of do our progress report, how we're checking things off and moving forward. There have been some interesting changes on the Washington side. Some Washington residents may be aware of it, but a redistricting map was released 2 weeks ago and potentially throws our project into a new district and with none of its veteran advocates at the state level. So that's something that we're monitoring. I think it's not, completely clear if that map is holding, and if, the filing deadline for those elections though is in May. So I think the next month's going to bring more clarity and probably help to inform what things we might adjust, especially for the Washington side. Then just some housekeeping items. I mean, we had a report in the packets if you have any questions on updates there, but the sign permit is now approved by this city.
Yes.
So the sign will finally be getting up. The Facebook Live event on Bridge Aesthetics is this week. So again, just beating that drum continually as best we can. I mentioned it a second ago, but there is an infographic up on the Facebook Bridge Project account, as well as Instagrams. If you're on those channels and you want to repost it, feel free, but it's also just a good resource to keep in your back pocket. And then I think just to tee up as we get into, like I said, we asked for half an hour, so I don't want to be greedy and take even more. And this is the main thing that we really want to talk through with you guys. But I think just to also set the stage really for what Jessica is going to drive into. I think that there, even recently, it's come up again, just kind of, communications being looked at as like a catch-all bucket that can be a whole range of things. And this project is, maturing, but we're still pretty young. And even in that, we've had different types of needs for communications. And a lot of that in the last year has been more direct and targeted in terms of really pursuing the federal funding. And funding is going to have continued more, I would say, traditional public relations throughout the next year. But this is really the meat of what we're starting to get into. And I think, going into this with the mindset that this is a publicly funded project. This is the public's project. Our job and who we will hand our seats over to is to honor and appreciate that we are some of the few voices that will be guiding this for the community, but also how we're continuing to tell this story and make the community feel like it's their story. So with that, we, as we're starting to get into now these very targeted areas of the project, I think I just want to reinforce that in my mind, a core amount of public information is a given throughout the life of this. I think we will see periods where we need less and can pull back on the gas of media relations or targeted, public outreach. But this idea of continuing to build and rebuild what I think has historically been a fractured relationship with our communities as it relates to the bridge is money well spent in my mind. You never see the book that's about the huge infrastructure project went awry because of all the misspending and public information. It's the misspending on the other parts of the larger project. And sometimes that misspending wasn't intentional. It's the result of the public not feeling brought along and an adversarial relationship. And so I think a lot of this is about making sure at these key points that people understand what's going on. And as Jessica goes through it, you'll also see, and this is where we want to make sure everyone's walking away clear. Just because we're going into the community doesn't mean that we're sending a message to the community that they get to make a vote on that specific decision or that they're going to weigh in on every little thing. But it's about reassuring them that we're in charge here, that we are, speaking on their behalf and making sure that the project oversight is in line with what our values are. And I always butcher Catherine's phrase that I feel like she said back in August, but it was really good. And basically to the spirit of just transparency and operating above board, let's just make sure that at every opportunity, if there is an opportunity to be sharing something to public, that we're doing it. So Jessica will kind of walk through what we've identified through the communications committee. And again, this is an internal working document. Our communications meetings, I don't know, we might need to just like embrace that it's not ever going to be an hour, because I think when we get on the phone, by the time we've finally gotten into the bolts of the first thing, we're at 50 minutes. So this is truly working. Nate, myself, and Jake have seen it, either waited in that meeting or seen it in email. But I think that the key here is to really talk through the different areas that we're anticipating coming up. What we see as those key messages, and some of these are going to feel like we're beating a dead horse, but you can never really do that on public messaging. And some will be new messages, and then also just making sure that at this point, it's not missing something that any of you are wanting to see as a key point at a certain part of the project. So, Jessica.
Do you actually mind going back to the first slide? I think it's just, with everything that Marla said, I also just wanna make it clear that like what we're hoping to do today with all of you is to just kind of walk through what we're hoping to do with the communications and public engagement through phase 1A. So that's April through December. And just make sure that we're all aligned. So like, as we're going through this, like, we want your questions, we want your comments, we want the tweaks, so that way we can build that into our approach, but also this ultimately is going to inform JLA's scope too. And then 2 slides ahead. Thank you. And Marla already touched on this, but this plan, the public involvement and communications plan, the focus is really for engaging the public through communications and engagement, but there are going to be separate plans for government relations and also tribal engagement. So I know that those are also very important audiences. And yeah, Mike.
Yeah, there's one thing that I think we need, and meaning that the ownership team needs to understand, and I think the authority needs to define for us, is there's a difference between informing the public and providing them information and getting their input. And I think we all need to be on the same page of where are we getting input and where are we informing them of what we are doing. And there's big differences between that. And I think we interchange those words, and then people have definitions of those. And when somebody says input, they mean inform, and somebody interprets it as input. And I think we all need to kind of understand, where can we actually get input? Where are we just informing people of what we're doing? And I think that, to me, would help us a lot understand what the level of involvement we can do and how we can do it. Because
I think the danger there is, if you go down to I-5, what's been going on down in I-5, instead of providing, here's where we are, here's where we're going, there's too much of, how do you feel?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just put that project into paralysis. So I think there's always a danger for our little bridge. We let that get out of hand. And I agree, Mike, 100%. To me, we're spending 90% informing and less than 10% asking for input. We spent the last 20, 30 years in the area here seeking input.
Yeah, well, and again, that's what I was saying earlier. It's like a lot of this is to be very clear. When are we looking for a vote, input, versus making sure feel like they are being brought along as a participant in probably the most significant infrastructure project this region will see. And somebody said it earlier, but I think it's true. The benefit we have that I think you can see is a struggle with the I-5 project and where we're different. We have a much more cohesive community fabric that's already been threaded. And I think all of us, whatever your reason is why you applied to be on this authority, or why you've been working on it or cared about it for so many years, is because of an attachment and a connection to the community. Like, we've got a lot of, that's a strength that we have. And now that we're getting into a part of the project where we're shifting into actually the doing, I think that's where it's so critical to not lose that by saying, well, now we've got to meet this deadline. We've got to keep it moving. We're not going down the route of I-5. And this is about being very sure that we are all clear on what we're informing the community about. And then these few moments where we do still want them to be engaged or there's an opinion. Because when it goes off the rails, again, now all of a sudden the money drain is about crisis communications, which is never where you want to find yourself. And that then is about delaying the schedule that is definitely driving us staying on track and budgeted. So, you know, I think that they come together. I think that like ideally you want this scenario, like we've got a community that's pretty on board. And I feel like especially in the last year as we've started this up and getting that federal funding award is like buying in. And it's nice that they're opening all these emails and like, that's what we want. You know, we don't want to turn them away because that's when you get people in a corner doing extra public records requests and convinced we're hiding something. And so I think to just continue to say, there's nothing here being hidden, but there's also a lot that's going to start happening fast. And so really this being done well and effectively makes the like day-to-day work of this project and your lives easier is the goal.
It's the bulldozer.
Yeah.
And everything else.
Yeah.
And if I may, you don't want to have a vacuum develop where there is no communication, because when that happens, people find their own answers. And so one of the things that's incumbent on all of us as members of this board, we are the best communicators of this project. So inform, disclose, inform, disclose, inform, disclose. Have conversation with people, make it come up in conversations. The more people hear from us, even if we're repeating the same thing and they're not getting any new information, the information is being reinforced every time they talk to us. It's the same every time. They know they can trust us. They may not know what we're talking about. They may miss an acronym, but they're hearing those same things over and over. And because we're taking the time to do that, we look as though we're trying to, that's the involvement that keeps them from wanting to have those like, well, what about, you just take that off the table by just informing and disclosing all the time.
And I think Mike brings up a good point, and you'll see this in some of the messages we're putting out. This project hasn't gone on for a long time for a lot of people. They're irritated. They're like, enough already, just get this student build thing. So some of the messages are to remind people that actually the NEPA process, there was a lot of public outreach back then. Money was spent on that. There were opportunities. If you missed them, okay, but they did happen. And so trying to also like do that memory jog for people so that there isn't, like you said earlier, a reflexive place because you feel like you're being sidelined to get on defense and assume the worst. Assume that we were never including the community at those key points. Assume that these types of projects don't have those protections for like public engagement. So that's where, you know, probably for people who have been around it a long time, it'll feel like, oh God, we got to talk about that again. But it's a reminder that like most people's day to day, they're not like, oh yeah, in February of 2019, there was that chance to, you know, attend a workshop.
What we're talking about too is informing them. And I think that's the difference. And to me, the key word that gets people hung up is that's not asking for input, right? That's telling them what we're doing, that's giving them information, and here's the progress we're making. This is what we're doing. I think as long as we all understand that difference, and I think, like I said, I think sometimes we mix them up, is getting input from them can be disingenuous to them when you say, we want input, right? And then you don't do anything with that input, right? And we're at a point in the project where criteria standards are going to dictate what we do. And there's very little input from the public that'll change that unless the authority wants to take on liability. Right. So I think there are key pieces that we can still have input on. But I think that's, to me, what I hear the difference when I hear people talking about it. When somebody says we're going to go get input from the public, I think what we mean is we're going to inform them of what we're doing. And when somebody says, well, we're not going to get input, doesn't mean we're not going to inform them. It means they don't have I want to say this is going to sound wrong. They don't have a say, but they really, in a lot of ways, don't have a say in, are we going to make this a 8-foot lane or a 10-foot? No, there's criteria and safety standards that are going to dictate that. We're past the point of that discussion. You know, are we going to extend it all the way down to Benjamin and all the way up to Dr. No, that's outside the project limits. We're not going to do that. Right? You know, and that's where I think those two words, I think, get intermixed and cause confusion when we're talking. And I think we just all need to be very aware of what we're saying, because I think people hear, oh, we're not getting input as, oh, well, then we're not telling them anything. No, that's different. Informing them is totally different. I think we need to do a ton of informant, a ton of like, here's what's going on. I said, we need a camera up as soon as we start construction and they can go watch it every day, right? Like, but input is a different thing, and that can derail us and get us really on the wrong path if you can spend as much time as you want doing it. I mean, but you're gonna be in that same do loop we've been for the last 25 years.
We've been very thoughtful and intentional in the distinction of each of those in this, if we want to keep going.
Yeah, guys, we only got
Yeah.
19 hours,
Yeah.
14 minutes left on the 2015th day of the board.
So.
I'm gonna, this is Doug. I'm gonna have to drop off here, but just one thing. We really don't pack pairs in June and July. And we have a rooftop deck that could be utilized for an event.
That'd be
That
awesome.
stairs right at the bridge. So, if you want to plan anything like that, let me know. We can help out.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, we have a public open house planned for July. And so that would be perfect timing. Thanks, Doug.
I think that would also be really good for a joint transportation committee.
Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, it might be hard to put boards up on the side.
Good photo.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to what we're doing. I'm gonna stand up, I apologize. So to your point, like where you see the question mark, that's where we're asking for some input and the I is informed. But I want to preface this in saying that this phase 1A is really the only real time that we can ask the public for feedback on certain elements related to the aesthetics and the race grant considerations. And so there's 3 more meetings in phase 1A with our Bridge Aesthetics Committee. And there will be 2 open houses, and Eric's already spoke to that, like what we're going to be doing at those 2 open houses. We also will be doing multimodal outreach in September, October for the RAISE grant work. So that's again, like the bike ped cross section. What are we thinking about there? And we're going to be doing Spanish language workshops with each of those open house rounds.
So a question for you on the multi-modal.
Yes.
That's more than just the cross section on the bridge, right? That's
the off the bridge.
Yeah, it is off the bridge as well. Yes.
so.
Connecting to the transportation network.
Before we leave tonight, I really want to talk about that. I've got some real concerns.
Okay.
Not for this year, but going forward with that piece of it,
Okay.
with our mission.
Okay.
Well, the RAISE grant.
Vision what can happen there though.
Yeah, I think, and that's kind of where my head was going earlier. There's some of this where we're moving into the project where now we lean on some of our other community agencies and partners to, like, this is a binge and white salmon stepping up here.
That's.
And we don't have that at our local, but that is absolutely what is envisioned, is that's where now we catch the community and say, now let's get into the fun stuff, which is like, you're off the bridge. That's not the authority. That's not the bridge project. But it's about building the whole network, which ties back into the bridge charge, this being that essential link.
That's what.
Yeah.
But you see doing that in the initial $3.6 million grant.
That RAISE grant is about doing that.
And we'll get it.
Yeah.
Okay, so where I am in this, I'm in agreement with that. If you go back to our charter basically says we're building a bridge. We're not building anything on the outside of it. In fact, we were kind of told, don't do that.
But then I would say, why did we apply for that then? We submitted a RAISE grant and said we are building the network of multimodal off the bridge.
Here's what I suggest, and it's kind of a compromise. I think now that we've got to do it. We've got to do the study. But I think we ought to have somebody here lead a very small team to work with the various cities and the counties. And that team sits over here, reports into us, but they're focused on that. So none of the other teams that we've got are worried about that thing other than how it impacts the bridge debt.
Yeah.
And then you're set up nicely that, after we've spent all the money, we cut this off. And if these other entities want to go after grants, God bless them, go after the grants.
Yeah, I mean, that's how, I think we've seen this the same way. It's less concerning to me. I actually see this as like a good example of how we're thinking more broadly about the project, but definitely the same thing. I mean, from the beginning of this application being, thought of and then submitted and now awarded, I have always seen it as this is nice to finally have and show as an example back to federal funders how you can do this. It is a chance for these cities to step forward. And, you know, some of that, I'm sorry,
No,
jump
you're
back
good.
in. But that work is definitely about doing that plan and exactly that, handing it over to the counties, the cities on both shores, but more so the underdeveloped North Shore to say, you want to see these things, make it happen. There's a benefit for our cities and counties of now we're going to get that planning and make sure that it's cohesive back to the bridge. But, you know, whether we need a subcommittee to be that intermediary, or it's just a more black and white, like from the beginning, the way it is presented to the public is the Bingen and white salmon representation and staff, not a appointed commissioner.
But it's more than Bingen and white salmon, right? It also
It's the
includes
county.
Hood River.
Yep, yeah. But the majority of it was that it's about the North Shore. It is about both sides.
But we're pushing back on
Yeah.
this, and I think we're arguing the same thing. Even during this first phase here, I personally think we ought to be reaching out to these other entities and getting a team put together that white salmon, Bingen, Hood River are on this little working team with maybe one or two of our commissioners. And they are responsible for providing input into this study that HNTB is doing, but at the end of it, they own it.
Like, is
The
that-
bridge doesn't own it.
That is what we're doing with the rate. Yes, that is what we're doing.
That's
with-
what- Yeah,
There's
we're just still
two
waiting on-
major components to the race grant. One is the action plan, which is the big community event thing. And then two is getting to a 60% cross-sectional element on the bridge, which is determining, well, we wrote it up there, but it probably doesn't mean anything else. So how wide's the bike lane? How wide's the bed? What are we doing on the bridge? So those are the two things that we need to get out of the race grant. We originally did the race grant because we had to do an action plan and a planning grant in order to do an implementation grant, which could be as much as $35 to $50 million. So if the project does not need that $35 to $50 million, this action plan will set up all the other communities to be able to go out and apply for these implementation grants on their own and go get these. And that's what I think Mike's saying is that this is a little bit of a separate task, but it does have a component because the bridge is what opened the door to this. And it is connecting the two. So, and it still has to connect at the ends, right? So there is a portion of it that stays with the bridge, but there is a bigger piece that is more global to the community. And
So
I think it would be good to have a small group and treat this kind of like the aesthetics committee. We are separating it from ours and it'll have its own line item that is just raise grant because it has to be tracked separately. So we're going to have like a sub PM, a deputy PM run it with a whole nother group, nobody that's actually working on the actual bridge part to run it because it is somewhat a independent activity and then it's a planning activity that sets up for something else.
It feels like a communications opportunity with,
It's a huge communications.
I mean, you're sitting here, but,
Yeah.
but the city of White Salmon.
Get that mayor.
Well, get the mayor, but each one of the, so something maybe that, you know, whoever that PM is in your group.
Yep.
Can bring those people together, and I think.
They are one of the
We've
first
just been waiting on the funding.
Yeah, I mean,
the first
These
step
conversations have been
yeah,
going on.
is to bring all of the local stakeholders together. And we've actually are trying to isolate funding to reimburse them for their time so that they can get reimbursed for it. We got to work through some things with the feds on that, but that is the first activity because it's intended to get McKed's in, Cat in, Hood River County, Hood River City, Benjamin White Salmon, Quick Tack,
it's
all of them
great
together.
connecting opportunity from a communication standpoint to say, hey, man, we're not only trying to build this bridge, but we're also trying to help you with things that you generally can't afford and always get pressured to do, but can't find the money for. We're trying to help you also.
Yes, and we were able to get a grant that really supports all of that.
Yeah.
But, and it needs to have all of them involved.
And raise us all.
Oh my God.
Oh, my God.
All right.
All right.
So maybe it's more that we should pull it for this slide.
Exactly how your communication committees go 50 minutes before you start talking about it, so I'm gonna push us along here.
No, in fairness, it was just that, you know, there was in Washington.
They're all good questions.
State to watch. But that might be the most interesting watch.
And I do just, we will be involved. This project will be involved, and we are planning, at least JLA is planning on doing some raise grant outreach in October. And so I'm gonna need to make sure to keep everyone like looped in on what that looks like and like what that messaging looks like, and obviously work with our partners.
I think we just gotta be careful, and I think we ought to get contracts to look at this to make sure we're street legal. Is our contract with HNTB, can it include this stuff outside of the bridge?
As far as,
The
it
planning-
seems to me it's very, I'm hearing agreement is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
It's a planning grant that allows you to plan everything that connects to the piece on the bridge, and you gotta get it far enough ahead of it so that the bridge supports whatever.
But remember, what you're doing on the bridge is the two entry points. And you want to make sure you got enough lanes, and we've already thought through that. But all of this going all the way back up through, somebody could say, wait a minute, that is not within the scope of HNTB. It's not in the scope of the project. This project is to build a bridge. That's where I'm concerned about.
Planning of the bridge connects to the communities that it supports.
And I get that for the first 500 feet when you're going 3 miles.
I mean, again, I that's the deliberation that should have been when we were giving direction to HNTB of whether or not to pursue this funding opportunity. It is, we have it now, it's awarded, the scope as outlined, and what it's awarded for is that charge. So figuring out the balance, I think that what Mike's focusing in on, which is true, and we're just not there yet, is once we move into engaging the cities and interlocals are discussed, where the splits are of some of this administration or contracting to support like just those efforts. And I think to full circle this, the open house, if it's coming under the guise of bridge authority, public outreach is really going to be centering it back to the bridge component where we really have our charge in place. And maybe it's different ancillary open houses that the communities are doing.
Back to this, we will continue to do ongoing communications. So we also are planning to do 4 community events around the same timing as our open houses. We're going to continue to do Facebook Live events, which we saw great success with the first one. And the point of this is like, as the public starts to get more questions or have more questions where things are starting to get exciting, things, you know, like things are actually starting to fall into place. This is our opportunity to respond to their questions and get ahead of it. Can we go to the next slide, Amy? Mm-hmm. And so I wanted,
I want to make sure everybody's thinking about this because I want to make sure when we put our scope together, everybody realizes what we scoped and it's not a surprise to anybody. These are things they're planning to do. So if you think it's too much or too little, we'd like to get that feedback now. So just be thinking about that as she goes through this, because this is what she's proposing or we are proposing to do for the project. I don't want it to be a surprise to anybody when we get a
tension behind this will help with your thinking. If you don't mind.
No, keep going. I just, as you go through the whole thing.
Yeah, so
About, like, is this what you all want as far as your activities and what you want
to have them do?
So in April, on the 17th, as we've talked about, Eric talked about this earlier, this is where we are asking for some input on like, this is the theme that we came up with, that natural elements. These are some ideas that we have for the look and feel of the bridge for the different bridge users. So those bridge users being people who are driving, people who are walking, rolling, and people that are viewing the bridge. So of those ideas, what makes sense for the bridge aesthetics package? And that feedback is then going to inform the memo that will go out to the public, or components of the memo are going to go out in July. And so that July meeting is more of a confirmed meeting. There will be input, but it's more of a like, this is what we came up with. This is how we're going to use it. Does this make sense, or did we miss anything? So that way there's no surprises with the public once that information then gets passed over to our contractor. That September meeting sounds like we still need to do a little bit more workshopping on this, but that opportunity is for the raise grant stuff. So that is like, what should the bridge project be thinking about as it ties into the existing transportation network on either side of the bridge?
So feedback for you on that.
Please.
in my opinion, I'm fine with April and July. But I think by September, we have to be done with what we want the bridge to look like through the aesthetics committee, and at least the configuration on the bridge of the lanes. We have to be able to give that to Kiewit to go ahead and price up and get a schedule built and so on. We cannot let that drag beyond that September 1 date. As far as the rest of it,
Yeah.
you know, the raised grant coming off the bridge and going wherever it's going to go, that's cool. It could take as long as it needs to take. But to maintain the schedule, we got to have that document configuration of the basic bridge by September 1.
One of the
So-
things we've got to do between now and September is see how much design criteria will define that and how much there actually is available for, because you got ADA requirements, you're gonna have safety requirements, that might dictate what that's gonna look like anyways, and there might not actually be a lot of opportunity for it. But we'll iron that out over the next couple of months.
But again, I, going back to where we started, I hear what you're saying, Mike, is that by September, you shouldn't be asking questions or asking for feedback. You need to be asking for questions and feedback far sooner than that,
Right.
so that by September, you're done. What do we have in order to be able to move that date forward? And
We need to get the raise grant agreement completed,
Yeah.
which we'll know.
Well, assume that you're going to get it.
That's
But frankly, the lanes on the bridge, we got to do anyway.
Right.
Okay, so whether we had the raise grant or not, by September, we've got to have that figured out to be able to give it the basic scope design to Kiewit. So the raise grant doesn't bother me a bit.
Schedule certainly to be like, talk about multimodal connections and the amenities in July or as soon as we can. We're just following the schedule that's been given to us based on HNTV and contracting and the raise grant.
But that's why we're talking about it now, that
Yeah.
people make sure people understand the relationships of each of these little pieces going forward.
And maybe the better question for the commissioners is, would you all want an opportunity to engage the public and ask for some initial input on some of the bicycle and pedestrian components of the bridge? Or does that not feel like a public involvement opportunity that will be valuable?
We would be this. Because every single time we get anybody in the aesthetics talking about it, that is the focus of the discussion. And I'm sitting here wondering if it should be some, and I don't know how to do it, integrated into that aesthetics piece.
I happen to agree with that.
I don't.
So we just need to think about the scheduling of it, but
Yeah.
confirm that it's an element that needs to just get.
Yeah.
I mean, finally,
If I may, though, I think, Mike, to your point is, we still need to have some idea of what the criteria are that we're working with, right? I mean, we can't ask the public to input about a bike or ped lane that's 25 feet wide when we have criteria that we need to meet from states, Washington, Oregon, or the federal government to say it can only be 15. So I feel like before we can have that discussion, we need to at least have some idea of what the general scope of the thing can be. And I would also say that some of if you sort of, to Mike, to your point, if we know it's got to be 15 feet wide, then call it 15 feet wide. Kiewit moves on, we get prices. Some of the other things that divide up what happens within that 15 feet, they will cost money, but they can be implemented later. They can be movable barriers. They can be some other things that maybe don't necessarily get to that full infrastructural level piece if we know the size of it. So maybe some of this can move a little further out into the future. But I think knowing those criteria are going to be
We
key.
can have the typical from an engineering standpoint criteria and where we have flexibility by June. I mean, it's not that much. We just have to look it up.
Right.
Right.
And then you could go out to the public,
Yeah.
comment on that.
Yeah.
Which may mean this is it. Thanks for looking at it.
so I guess for me, it's looking at those sideboards in where if you look behind you right now, it's showing an 8-foot section for e-bikes. and say we start looking at the numbers and we're looking at over 520, it's the question, is that something we can drop to save millions of dollars? And is that something? And so thinking about that ahead of time is what levers are we going to pull in order to rein the costs back in by a significant amount? And then knowing that we're walking into that, we need to be very clear and purposeful when we go into these gathering initial inputs with the community of, would you rather pay an extra dollar in tolls or would you rather have an e-bike lane?
Have the trade-offs conversation.
You need to be able to have that trade-off conversation. And that's something that I think would be purposeful in that what's set for September, but we need to push that up to maybe a June
Sure.
timeframe so that we have, what is the communities, would you rather pay more in tolls? Because it could be cost more.
Sure, and I think a part of that is too, for the current budgeted amount at 520, this is what you will get. And so that, if that's cool, great. Just making sure that they know where that tipping point is, where now we have passed over 520. What does that mean? We don't know what those milestones are. If it's 525, how does that factor into tolls? That's probably a micro level thing. It doesn't need to be figured out, but just I think the public understanding, what do we get for 520? And if you want more, so be it. But yeah, just that they're clear that we have budgeted in some amount of infrastructure for bike and ped in 520. The restrictions and the regulations suggest it has to be this. Are you cool with that?
Are we okay? Like,
This is, yeah.
We're down to 18 hours.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go by this or go through this slide really quickly. We are really hoping to just continue to manage and maintain the existing communications program that we've already established. Any questions or concerns about that?
Yeah,
Yes.
this is our chance.
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned, again. I like what you're doing, but now we're getting to the point where is it worth a trade-off as far as cost? So the question that I've got is, how much more video do we really need to do versus we'd like to do?
Mhm.
And how expensive is it? That's an area that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I think that's a conversation that we're still having and working through. I would say, and again, like this opportunity won't come to this community again for another 100 years. That doesn't mean we're throwing out a red carpet and going to the Oscars with whatever we're making as a video. But these are all moments that are lost once they've happened. And so I do think there is an element of this, and this is what we've been trying to work through, that is about what is the cost-effective way to account for making sure when key things are happening, these moments engage in the community through the aesthetics committee and the different people who have touched this project and their stories that come into it, that we are capturing those on videos so that at the end of the project, and I think this does still tie back to some of the mitigation in 106, how are we leaving this time capsule for future generations, but also the current community of all the different things that this project was and how we got here and how it was done. I don't think that, and again, if you want to look at numbers, it's not going to challenge the more expensive parts of this project. It's not going to be adding the additional lane or whatever. Now, is there a cost to it? Absolutely. But I would say that cost will continue to pay for itself with the social equity that you continue to build throughout the life of the next generations, and also just at the end of this project and all of our stakeholders. Like, don't forget, the 200 million was a huge part of our federal delegation going to the table for us, telling this story for them and making sure that they're getting recognition along with all the state leadership is a key part of it too. And in the current media landscape, the more compelling way to be doing that is through video narratives, not. Okay. That's fine. All right. But we are working on the asterisk.
Okay.
What that looks like isn't that we're producing all these videos, and that's what I've been talking to Mike and Jessica about. It's not just a metric of like, we've got to produce 2 stories a year. No, maybe there's a couple of years where there's no stories. It's just getting the footage so we make the great story at the end.
The one other one is, and there's not anything, but do we need to continue with all 4 media sources, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and whatever?
Yeah.
I mean, do we need all 4 of those? And I don't know how.
We're reaching different audiences in
Are we
different.
getting the value we're putting into it? Like YouTube, I don't know that I don't know, I can't say. I
We
did.
just use YouTube to store the video.
Yeah, that's it, is we're not producing
Passive.
content for YouTube, it's just to store the videos from these
The
meetings.
thought was just as, I
I have to go look, how much effort are we putting into those and are we getting value out of what we're putting into those?
When we produce the content for one, it's repeatable for all the different sources. So it's like, it's literally just a difference of like copying and paste.
And I know some people use Facebook, but like to me, the Facebook one is the one, I never do business stuff on Facebook, so.
Well, that's where I think they are too. And Catherine's brought it before, but I think LinkedIn and Facebook are like in 2 different areas, but both really valuable for us.
Yeah.
If it was of interest to like try to further like clarify how much of that is the lift, kind of back to the video thing, like when you separate just that out, what does that commitment look like on a monthly level? Is that, 3 hours of time or, I mean, that exercise can be done, but YouTube's totally passive. And I think Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn are like buy one, get 3.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that messaging and the graphics for it are not time intensive. I mean, we're basically using those graphics for other reasons too. So I want to very quickly run through these. And I think I laugh, but like the point of this is that like, I want to generally get your okay with the way that we're speaking about these various components. And these are just like top line, high level concepts of the way we're talking about it. There's a lot of other details and specifics and things that we need to be thinking about with each of these areas. But one of the key messages is just like activities happening in early design. That is another way of saying that is what is phase 1A? But the public doesn't honestly care what phase 1A is. And so what's happening in phase 1A, we are moving from a preferred alternative into the design process. And that includes looking at the aesthetics. So that's the memo, and the memo is going to inform the materials, the colors, the lighting, viewing, etc. Roadway. So this is your point, Commissioner. Just finalizing the cross-section width and travel lanes and shoulders, biking and walking. So finalizing the cross-section for those ped paths or the bike ped paths, and then the system connections. So how does the bridge tie in to the existing transportation network on either side? And it's not that we're necessarily building it with a project, but how does it connect? I can pause.
When you say how it connects is basically for people, pedestrians and bicycles.
Exactly. NEPA is our guiding document. So what is NEPA? Not everybody knows what that is and why it's important. But this has taken 25 years of modeling, engineering assessments, and public involvement to get us to this point.
We should find the 25-year-olds in this community.
Yeah.
Totally. Like the class.
Find them at the document. Building off that work. So we're going to be building off that work to finalize the steps required to start construction in late 2025. Which means another way of saying that is we're not restarting. We have already made some really key decisions and we're building off of that momentum. And some community members are going to possibly feel like this design process, especially with the aesthetic stuff, may feel fast because we're coming at them pretty quickly. And so we just need to remind them why the schedule is what it is and how it supports them getting the bridge in the time that we promised them. We also need to stay on schedule. So the bridge needs to be replaced now more than ever. Our authority is committed to delivering the new bridge by October 2029. To do that, they need to move forward with decisions made during NEPA, and staying on schedule keeps costs down. We are also committed to using project funds responsibly. And that means building a bridge that all community members can afford to use daily. This is an important thing because especially as we talk about design and aesthetics, there may be some things that people would love to see and like the iconic bridge idea. And that also, or as you brought up, Grant, like there's things that might mean like $1 more. Oh, sorry, somebody else brought up that it might cost an extra $1 if we do this. And so ultimately we want a bridge that everybody can continue to use, and the goal will guide bridge design decisions. Higher project costs will impact future toll rates. So our design build contractor, what will they do? This might be obvious for everyone in this room, but it's probably not obvious for the public. Like, how is HMTV different, for example, from Hewitt, or where we end up ultimately giving the NTP to? Introducing the contractor and why they're the right choice for the project. Again, this is the community's bridge, and so just reminding them, like, why were they selected? Why are they qualified? Explain how the contractor will work with the bridge authority and owner's rep. Explain progressive design build approach. So how does this contractor move that design and build process forward, and set the stage for future workforce conversations that would probably happen at the tail end of this year. And then finally, just reinforcing, like Marla said, that like we can't repeat the important messages too many times. Our anticipated project cost is $520 million. We are now more than 60% funded, but we still need funding from Oregon and Washington, and we need your help. And this is our call to action to remind people to reach out to their local representatives to tell them how critical this project is to you.
Do you think the public has really made the connection that this thing is going to be 520 million and their tolls are based on 50 million? All of this other money that it makes up the 520, that's through grants. And because I keep hearing in the community complaining, why are the tolls so high? Well, my goodness, if we didn't have all of this, those tolls would be 10, 15 times higher.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually the Facebook conversation we wanted to do next, and really do a staff-led presentation on tolling and dive into it, because I agree. I mean, that was the biggest question or thing that kind of stuck after that first community conversation. I'm sure we all get those questions. So definitely, I think hammering in on and explaining it visually too, so that it resonates with people, but also how we envision using it too is to really get them fired up on that fourth point, like connect emotionally on, like, this is the thing where you have as much power as I do into Salem and into Olympia. We have to see these commitments secured in order for us to keep the toll where we want it to be. Like, this is probably, I mean, we just talked about the part where people get mad about input, but this is the thing where people actually can wrap their hands around and do something, and we need them to do something. Yeah.
So in my opinion, of everything that you guys said is important. I get it. To me, this is the next most important thing that we ought to be just screaming to the public that, hey, you guys have the ability to take this slice and make it like that, which means this slice down here can be smaller. And we worked our buns off trying to make all that happen. We now have 6 or 7 months. We need your help. We got to have this funding in the 25. And this is your time to stand up. Now, all the rest of the stuff is cool and neat, but this is the meat and potatoes.
We made that pitch.
So to that end, one of the things that I think I brought up in our comms meeting is a key piece of this is, if for the public engagement, let's get some lists of phone numbers and addresses for who those reps are. I know some of these are changing in Washington and we don't know, but if we are going to be reaching out and asking the public to help us, we have to help them by giving those, because I think all the time of things that I want to write to one of my reps and I'm like, who's my rep again? What, district am I in? And I'm super informed on this stuff. So people that are not informed don't know it all. So we need to provide put it on a platter for him. Like, here, not only are we asking you, but here's the information. I mean, short of making it, a bridge authority branded.
I mean, basically, this is like a drum we want to beat fall through winter, like make everyone feel it, whether they're an incumbent, newly elected, newly acquiring this part into their district, like this has to be prominent. And I think too, some of it's reinforcing the coalition building here, like One Gorge is a good partner, but coordination with our chambers and the agencies. If you have an ask this year, this is the critical ask for the region. We don't want to have competition in our region too, and make sure not just that the public's making the phone calls, but that we don't get blindsided on the Washington or Oregon side by some significant ask or something pulling attention away from, if you got to choose one thing that's going to Hood River white salmon, this is the ask, basically.
So when I stirred all this stuff up a week or so ago, this was what I was most concerned about.
Yeah.
And we've got a window of opportunity that this ought to be like a war. Okay, we're setting up the tanks, they're going out in front, and then we're going to have the troops behind them and whatnot. We need to get ourselves organized for this.
I think, well, I would say we're trying to win the war, not the battle. And, that war win is strategic in that we want to beat that drum, but we want to do it when they're are in the right space. We don't want to beat it so incessant for too long that they zone out, or we start to give them a reason where we're the irritant and we're the one that they.
I agree that my biggest concern is, damn, we should have done that.
Yeah.
So let's think about it now, what we want to do for the next 7-8 months.
This is communications. That's their goal. That's their job. That's what they need to work on.
Again, a lot of that's going to get led from government relations. Like that meeting is in the next couple of weeks, and that's then that synergy back of where public information and government relations connect. Yeah. And what our strategists that we pay that have that expertise guide us on how to be not annoying, but favorable. And then where we get the public involved and don't piss people off. But all of that is, it's not getting missed. It's definitely like top of mind. It's just about making sure that when we do come forward and activate a plan, that we don't go, oh, that was like too fast, too furious. And now it's July and everyone likes, and our strategists are getting phone calls of like, I don't want to hear about the bridge anymore,
And the representative contact information is on the website.
Okay, cool. Just making sure that is, we're constantly putting that out. Just because
we're going to do a QR code temporary tattoos.
We can just hold it up. No, I think to tease out a point, Marla, that you were making is we as a group can lose control of this. Get an annoyance to those lobbyists and offices, but it never hurts to have the public, because if the public comes in behind us with that, I know that some, staff members can be like, they teed this up and got all their constituents to write these letters, but they can't pin that on us. These are just people that are informed in their community. So these, I think, are two separate things. We do need to be strategic as a group to not annoy the crap out of these people. But if it just so happens that all their constituents just write a bunch of letters, wasn't our fault. It seems like the community wants this, buddy. I think they're separate, and it's important that if we can it's a clandestine effort to get the community to come along and do that work for us. And we can just be like, gosh, we just must have.
It sounds like the main thing is we want resources applied in this area when appropriate and however needed. So when you're building out the scope, what the generous level of support is to make sure that what we're not hearing when it's September and we're like, we got to add this. Oh, we didn't account for that. Or something's missed.
So I'm going to pull this back in. We're blowing through a lot of time. We still have our action items to deal with.
That was it for the slides.
That was it?
Yes.
Oh.
One thing about that, it sounds like we want to move up schedule in terms of multimodal engagements. So that we all agree with doing that, is moving that up to instead of September to June or whatever makes sense. Raise grants. We're on the same page with that.
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Grant. That was going to go on the directives. And Anna, did you want to say something?
Oh no, I'm okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I just saw you turn your video on, so Figured we had to have one last word. Okay, we are going to move on, even though I know we all have more we could add to that. To our new business action items, we're gonna move on to the project charter between ODOT and the Bridge Authority.
Yeah, so we've been working with ODOT and FHWA on a project charter because we are not a certified agency, local agency. This is kind of makes us a semi-certified agency. It's just a decision-making charter between us, FHWA and ODOT, defines our roles and make sure we all understand where we are on the project. So we wanted to bring it to the board before we signed it. It's went back and forth with ODOT and FHWA to get to the point where it is. So it's based on two other agreements that they did between ODOT and FHWA on the project. So
I personally think it's gonna be a valuable document once we get it signed. Kind of give us some ground rules, how we work together.
Yep.
With that, I would entertain a motion to approve the project charter.
To approve the signing of the project specific charter.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Seth, you're back on.
Yeah, nice. Aye.
All right, just making sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I was like, oh, I saw the last one out. But now I'm back.
Okay, let's move on to the appointment of the co-chairs.
So in January of this year, we were supposed to appoint two co-chairs. To find a first co-chair and a second co-chair for 2-year terms because we had originally only set up 1-year terms. We needed to go and have the two counties reconfirm everybody for their full terms. So that's been done now. And now we're to the point where we need to have the board identify the two co-chairs and then to identify the first co-chair and second co-chair. And the way the language currently says is that the first co-chair serves for 1 year and then the second co-chair serves the second year. It's a total of 2 years. So I will leave it up to you all on how you move forward with nominating, identifying and voting on.
Does time served count currently, or is that starting?
No, it was starting.
Well,
We started in January 1st.
It would be retro to January.
back to
Okay, thank you. That's.
Okay. We'll do this how we do everything, at least at the county. I will open up nominations for the first co-chair. Would anybody like to
Somebody
nominate
needs to
someone for the first?
We do have to come out of the meeting with co-chair.
Is anybody allowed to nominate or is it just commissioners?
No, board members.
Board members, yeah.
I'll nominate you, Jake.
Okay, is there any other nominations for first co-chair?
Is this restricted to the Washington side or?
It is not restricted.
Now it's Morgan.
Okay.
Okay,
Any of us.
We do need one from each.
yeah. Hearing none, I guess we can approve by consensus. If
I have one question, just to clarify, maybe this is where Catherine is going, but, and I forget in our bylaws.
Yes.
Because we're a party of 12, but we have 6 voting members.
Correct.
Are the 6 voting members the only ones that are eligible to ever be a chair?
It does not.
I would assume.
I would
that be-
assume that's,
I
yeah.
think so, but we've got non-voting like running some committees, so.
So what I would say is.
Maybe we don't.
No, we don't.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Surprise, I was just trying to throw it over to Nate.
Yeah, I would say that this is something in the bylaws. We're gonna make a few edits
Yeah,
to.
we're gonna change these.
For you all to consider. But yeah, I think be thinking about that as we develop the bylaws and bring them back to you if you want to make any edits to this process.
Sorry, I have another, can I just follow up? on
go for
question? Can an alternate nominate somebody to be a chair?
I
As it-
wouldn't expect so,
Yeah.
because of the way the
Okay.
board sits.
Great, so although I'm on the phone, I cannot, just to Nate and everyone else, I cannot nominate anyone.
Well, I think we're in discussion. If we're following Robert's rules, we can either be bringing a motion forward. Is a motion on the table? Was that seconded, the first chair?
It was opening it for nominations. So that was where we started.
So, because I would like to hear what Catherine has to say. I mean, in the spirit of how this commissioning authority has worked.
Yeah, and I would like to clarify as well in terms of alternates. So as alternates, we are non-voting members. If we're here, if we just show up to a meeting and in the case of the Riverside, I'm an alternate directly for a person, right? Which
Not
is,
anymore.
Not anymore, you are not. That changed.
no, it is changed.
That has changed.
But nevertheless, if I'm here and the other person is here, I'm a non-voting
That
member.
is correct.
But so is that, I mean, just for clarity in our bylaws, is making sure that there's an understanding that the people that show up that are the quorum, whether it be voting members or alternates, if the people making up the quorum are some alternates and some voting members, the quorum is the quorum, and those actively members of the quorum in that given day have a voting ability. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
So you have a vote.
Always the big question at the beginning was, we want to hear from the alternates though. So we include the alternates in all conversations. You have a voice at the table. It's just when it
A
comes.
voice, not a vote, unless you're, okay.
Unless you take out the other voice.
Okay, sorry, that was a follow-up question to Catherine, kind of, sort of, and Marla and everybody.
Just for clarification, it does say that appointment shall be from the directors that are currently seating. You will make a recommendation on 2 co-chairs, and then from those 2 co-chairs, you will recommend a first and second. So I think the first motion needs to be of the 6 sitting members, who are the 2 co-chairs, or who is being nominated to serve as co-chairs. If we get more than 3, then we'll have to vote on the 2.
But seated directors, this is to my point, is seated directors.
Means who's ever actively making up the quorum today.
Okay. All right, perfect.
Oh, whoa, wait a minute. So I don't think that,
If you,
can you have an alternate who is?
Discussion
today,
Today.
They are-
One of the co-chairs.
yes, if they,
No.
Okay.
They cannot. Directors, not the alternate.
they can make a motion though.
Right.
Today. but they
Because they're voting
Today.
in lieu of. Okay.
Wow. Okay, so we will do that. There is nominations on the floor for the co-chairs. There's been a nomination for Commissioner Anderson. Is there a nomination, any more nominations for the Washington side? Okay, I will open the nominations for the Oregon side for the co-chair.
Nominate Mike Fox.
There's been a nomination for Mike Fox. Are there any other nominations for co-chairs? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the 2 co-chairs.
Motion to approve the 2 co-chairs.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, there's a motion, and a second discussion. Hearing none.
Catherine, did you have discussion?
Oh,
Yes,
Discuss.
I would just like to say now, because I can speak, I would like to say that I very much value the 2 chairs' work up to this point and feel that maintaining leadership is very impeccable, is very integral to this project's success. Over.
thank you for not saying we are impeccable, because we are definitely not. But thank you, Catherine.
Unheard.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Okay, we need a motion for first co-chair, and then the second will automatically follow.
Guess what, rock, paper, scissors for it.
Yeah, what are your, I'd like to hear from the co-chairs if there's a preference.
I have
Fine.
absolutely no opinion either way. I'm absolutely fine the way it is.
Okay, well, I just know that he is taking a huge burden on all things bridge, but he does a great job as well. Managing the committee for engineering. Fine running meetings. I don't mind it. So however you guys want to do it.
I'm fine with it.
Nominate Jake as first and Fox as second.
There's a second. That was a motion, not a nomination.
All right, I'll make a motion to do that.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. All right, is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're really burning the midnight oil now. Okay. We need approval of funding, finance and tolling committee to develop tolling policy. Page 51 for those that are looking.
Yeah, and I believe everyone was also sent a copy of the port one, which was just adopted.
Oh,
So
I did not, that just come today, sorry.
It should have been in the
I
packet.
didn't see it. Because one of my comments, this was a surprisingly slim memo. Great, but I think it's an important thing.
What this
As
motion
we're
is,
scrutinizing all the things we need.
let me clarify the motion. This motion is for staff to move forward with developing of the toll policy, not approval of the policy.
Yeah.
This is just to direct staff to move forward with development of the policy.
So
Bring it to their.
when we say policy at this stage of the project as it relates to tolling, how deep is that going? Is that about the infrastructure and what needs to be accounted for how we toll, or is it about our
It will evolve.
authority's policy position when we aren't even actively tolling for 4, 5 more years about how we treat transit or low income or whatever? Because I do not think this is that was a key question.
Some of those questions you will not be able to answer right now, so this will be an evolving policy. So Carrie, do you want to expand on what the policy will say now versus what they will have to decide on in the future?
Yeah, and the reason, and I do understand the concern that look, we're not talking about tolling for 5 years. Technology there may even be minor changes or major changes in technology between now and then. But what we're endeavoring to do in the very near future is get into a traffic and revenue study that's going to support our financial transactions. So this is an investment grade study, and there are certain fundamental decisions that you all need to answer in the very near term. And they're the types of things that are very broad that you're going to be in a position to answer. Things like, will you do all electronic tolling? Or will you employ toll collectors with gates? And what we intend to do here in the next month is to convene a workshop where, we'll have some experts come in. HNTV's got some, and there may be others, and just talk about the pros and cons of some of these high level decisions. Then as time goes on, what we'll be doing in parallel with the development of toll policies is developing what's called a concept of operations, which basically looks at all the possible use cases of somebody who would be crossing the bridge and how they might pay their toll and how that transaction will work its way through the system. What payment methods do you want to accept? Credit cards, cash? If someone wants to pay cash, how will they do it? Those kinds of things. And these will be sequential. So it's big picture first to get the basics for the traffic and revenue study. And then as time goes on, really, we get to a level where the toll policies actually become business rules. How will we operate the business of collecting tolls and processing transactions? And that we're probably a year away from getting down to business rules. So initially, it's going to be the big picture policies, all electronic or cash. Do you want to accept tags? Do you want to be interoperable with Oregon and Washington if that's a possibility? Those kinds of questions. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, again, maybe for future, I would feel more comfortable with the memo that's clearly outlining like what these high level fundamental decisions are that we're asking staff to work on with this committee, because I think for many commissioners, this is a key part of this project. And I just want to make sure we're all understanding what will be coming back to us and not get surprised at the end of all of a sudden decisions about future users, different user groups, because this came up in our adopted authority values and like guiding documents. So it's important to me that what we're saying a go and green light to spend time and resources on is about this, like more the infrastructure side of tolling, which Terry, if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like that's where this is staying focused.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And one of the things I want to be clear too, one of the things that is not included in this discussion and won't be included in this discussion, the toll rates be. That's a completely different discussion, right? This is simply, a sequential development of policies around how are we going to collect tolls and how are we going to accept payments. For instance, right now you base your tolls on the number of axles that a vehicle has. There are alternatives to that you may want to consider, and we'll present those and talk about the pros and cons, and you can decide we want to continue to do it by axle, or we like some of these newer, more technology-driven ways of classifying vehicles, things like that.
But Terry, we should make sure everybody understands. This is phase one. Phase two is gonna be coming pretty quick. Where we'll have a chance to change this, saying 2 or 3 or 4 times during the life of the job. But we are gonna have to establish some rules for tolling as you do your traffic and revenue study.
Correct.
So.
Correct.
So
And there will come a point somewhere in phase 1B where we will have to lock down some system parameters, some concept of operations parameters, because the next step after the ConOps is the development of system requirements and actual system design. And you know, the lead time for getting a toll system procured and in place is 2 to 3 years. So, you know, we're not out in advance too much.
From a standpoint of a functioning committee within the board, are we and maybe I'm missing something, but will this be functionally like the comms committee or the finance committee or something? Can you describe how you see this?
That was actually what I wanted to point out and forgot to. One of the things in this motion that is key is that it's also, we're recommending that you put this under the funding, finance and polling committee. Add polling to the funding and finance committee and make it the funding, finance, tolling committee. Because that's where it usually lives in most agencies. So that was also part of this motion, was to ask the funding, finance, tolling committee to work with staff to develop a policy that will come back to the board.
Okay, so we're adding a line item to an existing committee's.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense to me than.
Not a committee or anything, just adding an item under.
Is there any further discussion, or I ask for a motion?
I move that we approve the adding to the funding finance committee tolling responsibilities, and for them to develop a tolling policy for board approval and adoption at a future meeting.
There a second?
I'll second that. Go for it. I'm on the committee, so I feel like you should second it.
Okay, any discussion other than who seconded it?
I just want to say it one more time, just to make sure I have it right. So the real idea here is to build a set of rules going forward for adoption that we can base the funding tolling study on before we get there, because the part of this study, as I understand, is what supports our ability to borrow money.
I would say that's part of the purpose, is to help answer some of those questions. Ultimately,
And in addition, it
basic
will
scope.
inform the design of the toll system. Ultimately,
Exactly.
these policies will inform the design of the system. What equipment will we need to collect toll in the manner that your policies dictate?
So there's an interface, I think, between that group and the ENC, that when you define the hardware and the firmware, we're part of that as far as going forward with Kiewit.
and yeah, and we'll there'll be more discussion. We can bring back a presentation and say, you know, here's kind of what we're looking at and some of the options, because there's a lot of options that, being a new agency, you'll need to decide that, you know, single gantry, 2 gantry, you want loops, you don't want loops, you want, you know, what types of classifications, how do you want to toll it?
I mean, basically, this motion is expanding the role of the finance committee to include this area, and we're saying, yes, take that on and now move forward. I think to Eric's point of just confirming we're hearing correctly, what I'm understanding, the first moving forward, and the only thing in this phase one initially is about tolling infrastructure. And you, staff, will be working with that committee to develop policy options about how we collect tolls to come back to the authority.
Yes. Everything comes back to the authority.
Well said, well stated.
I just want to make sure as we move into the formulas and like the rule part, which ultimately our policy decisions, we're seeing multiple options.
Yeah.
Of running math against some of our like overall authority.
Oh, yeah.
Aims.
You're assigning the homework to the committee.
Yes.
Yep.
And we come back and show our work.
I don't know if it's the interest.
And I would just like to say, you know, when you're doing a project of this size, scope and scale, this is, I've tried to sit in on the different committee meetings and I have to say these committees have the right people on them. And our committees are working very well and they're working well with staff. And I can't thank you all enough for all the extra time that you put in by doing all this. With that, would all those in favor signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, we have the authorization to proceed with the Joint Transportation Committee application. This is on page 52.
This was an application that was sent out. Arthur had sent this out. This is really an opportunity for us to get on a list for a listening tour. We may or may not get picked, but it's just simply authorizing us to submit an application. It may serve as that meeting, that in-person meeting. We don't know. It may be an extra one, but we did not want to pass up on the opportunities.
It's going to be on the roof, a rooftop bar.
Dan was talking about, right, in our meeting the other day.
I think so.
Yeah.
Coming out.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Move that we authorize the submittal of the Oregon Joint Transportation Committee application for a visit.
Second.
Go, you take it. You take it. Marlo seconds it.
Marla seconds it. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Okay, we have one add-on and that is the Kiewit interim notice to proceed. Staff update on this.
So I'm gonna start this and then Tahee may need to jump in, if we got a lot of questions, but the motion in front of you is to give a limited notice to proceed to Kiewit to go ahead and start work before we give them NTP, which should be this Friday. But this allows them more time to prep for the meeting on the 10th to get prepared for the bridge discussion. It does not increase their notice to proceed or limit. Not proceeding limit, sorry, I got my own acronyms messed up. Does not change their not to exceed amount. It just allows them to start billing a week earlier so that they can start preparing for that meeting. The maximum amount was 150,000. We did it for a month, just in case something happens that we don't sign it for. Yeah, in case we don't sign it. It will follow all the regular T&M rates that they will have, everything that we've submitted under the contract that we're getting ready to sign Friday. It just allows them to start getting paid to start work a week early.
The key thing is to get them ready.
We need the time.
April the 10th meeting.
Yeah, we need it. They've been working on it. They just would like to continue to work on it and we need them to be focused on it.
So I think the current amount is $130,000 and then what's a cost reimbursable contract, and then I notice to proceed, but it's gonna roll in the bigger contract once we actually get the main PDP contract.
Yeah, so if we execute on Friday, this will go away on Friday.
Any questions? Okay, would anybody like to make a motion for us to start
Move
this?
that we give Kiewit a limited notice to proceed to not to exceed value of $135,000. $130,000. Effective as soon as you can sign it.
Second that.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? I look forward to signing this and getting this ball rolling, and this is great that we're doing it ahead of time. Let's hope we can continue this process of being ahead of schedule. We'll talk about anything in regards to the tribal MOAs when I say that. With that, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, motion carries. Okay, let's move on to the informational items.
Sorry, I'm gonna try to go through these quick. Procurement schedule, as I said, we should complete that this Friday. The risk register is online. We'll keep that, continue to update that. The IGA was signed on the 19th by the port. We are working to do the assignments of existing contracts. I think it actually ends up only being the HTTP contract. I will double check with Kevin, but I believe they're gonna have everything by the 9th. Kevin, is that right, for the meeting on
No, we're ready to sign. I think the IGA gives me the authority to sign the document. So
Okay.
I think Jake's name is on that. So check your DocuSign. It should probably be in your inbox in the next 24 hours.
Awesome. All right. So that'll reassign our HNTB contract over, which will lead to item number 8 here in a minute. The Oregon House Bill 5201, that was just about the lottery bonds. The CTURI, we talked about, that was that we will be bringing back soon some recommendations on the amount that we will compensate the tribes. So this would be the first one, and we'll provide you the details of how that came together and for your consideration when we get to that point. But this is just kind of a heads up that we're getting close with C2R, which is Umatilla tribe. We're getting very close to that point where we'll be bringing that in front of the board. So, and then the HNTB contract. So now that it'll be reassigned in the next couple of days, we have an amendment that we also need to do that would put us in line with the Phase 1A Kiewit contract. We are in the process right now of developing that level of effort and that estimate. This will be the first time that the Bridge Authority has approved that. Everything up till now, the port has approved because it was a port contract. So what I wanted to, I don't know if we need a motion for this or not, was to propose a process for that approval. The thought was that it would go to the committees directly impacted by the scope, which I think primarily would be the communications and the E&C committee. And then just for the public input piece, and then the engineering committee is pretty much everything else. And then with their approval recommendation to approve the scope, it would then go to the finance committee that would then confirm that it was within the cash flowing budget of the project. And then it would come to the board for final approval. So it basically give you an interim opportunity for both the engineering committee and the communications committee to sign off on the scope and level of effort. And then the finance committee to confirm that we have the budget, and then the board to approve the overall contract.
What's the anticipated timing to work its way through all those committees and just thinking about our meetings? Is this like, we need this signed by when? Is there a hard date?
So what my thought was is we would shoot for it'll probably end up having to be May. I'd like to say the last meeting in April, and if we can get it done by the last meeting in April, which would be the third week, then we'll get it to the committees and get it through there and get it to that point. But I'm thinking the NCP for it is going to end up being May 1st.
So looking forward, this is going to happen every year, and we need to have it approved in place.
What we're going to recommend is that the contract, and this is the same thing we're doing with Kia, the contract will be for the full length of the project. As we go through the phases will be amendments to that contract. So you'll do a contract that'll be for us for the full length of the job. So through 2031, 2032. And then there will be amendments for Phase 1A. So this first amendment will be for us from April, May to December. The next one will be Phase 1B, just like it will be for Kiewit, which will be January through 18 months, whatever that is, 26, summer 26. And then from there, it'll be Phase 2 amendment, which will be for 4 years after that. Now, if we do an early works project, it messes that all up. We'll come back to you and talk about that. But if everything stays Phase 1A, Phase 1B, and Phase 2, you would do 3 amendments to the contract to fund us for each phase in parallel to the Kiewit phase.
So
Hold on, we've got a hand up from Catherine, so I wanted to get to Catherine real quick.
Mike, are you gonna be sending us that scope? Or are we responsible as committee to create that scope?
No. All you have to do is review it. We'll send you the scope. We'll send you the level of effort. You just need to look through it. We'll sit down and go through it with you. And then if you've got any questions or anything, we'll answer them. And then with your all's concurrence, I don't know what to call it. I'm trying to stay out of approval because we're not supposed to. But anyways, once you guys say it's okay, then we'll go to the finance committee. And then we'll bring it to the board immediately as soon as we can after that. If we have to do a special meeting, we could do a special meeting to give authorization for it.
Okay, and then is that approval gonna, we're gonna be going through that scope during one of our normal committee meetings,
One of your
correct?
E&C meetings is
Okay.
what I'd like to do, yeah, so that you're not having
Okay.
to schedule another meeting.
Okay,
Commissioner Fox.
thanks.
Yeah, the only concern that I've got with that whole approach, especially for the 1B area, is limitation of funds.
Mhm.
So we're gonna have to be very careful as we look through the cash flow and the scope of work that it falls underneath the.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing for all the contracts we're doing. I mean, we can only do contracts for the amount we have. So
Right.
Kiewit's contract, our contract, legal contracts, all of them will have that same constraint.
Something similar to that is what we're gonna do with Kiewit, correct?
It's exactly the same thing we're doing with Kiewit. Yep, except we're reviewing Kiewit's contract instead of having, I mean, ENC's looking at it, but we're doing the independent review of Kiewit's contract, and then our contract will parallel the scope of work that we negotiate with Kiewit so that we're in line with what, that's why ours falls a little bit behind theirs.
Right.
Because we need to know what they're doing in order to mirror ours to what they're.
To me, I think that's why we hired you guys, and I think that's fine.
Right.
I think the ENC committee probably wants to look at least at the scope of work and the timing of the scope of work.
Yep, because you need to make sure it's aligned with, ours is aligned with Kiewit's and makes sense
Yep.
that what we're doing is, some of ours is a little independent because we help with the authority and they don't. And it's like some of the funding, and there's some caveats where, we do tasks that they're not going to do, NEPA mitigation, and some things that we're taking on that they won't do right away, but anyway, so.
Just a quick question. So obviously, when HNTV started with this group or prior with the port, there was some idea of what you thought the scope of work would be, and there were some guesses, right?
Yep.
Well, you're a couple years into it now and working with both this group and prior with port. Are you seeing that what you anticipated is about right? Are you seeing that we're performing at a higher level, taking work off HNTV's plate? Are you anticipating in this new contract, oh gosh, now that we see how this is going, it looks like we're going to need to do more for the group? Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah,
It's changing.
it is.
But that's,
Their scope of service.
well, that's what I guess I'm curious, it's just that.
So, but I would tell you is we've taken on more helping get the authority set up than I think we anticipated would be. I don't think we knew what that was going to look like. So we've taken on more, I think, in that. I think the rest of it has been evolving as the project evolves. So we weren't sure how quickly the MOAs with the tribe would go. We weren't sure how quickly funding would go. So like our first year was a lot of, well, if we get funding, we might add this, but we might not because we don't get funding. So it was a lot of guesses. So I think phase 1A, phase 1B, and 2 will be much more consistent because we'll have funding and there won't be so many questions as to how much we will actually do. And they're more defined processes, right? So like 1B, to go from 15% to 90% design, we do it on every project, right? It's a pretty straightforward process, and we'll have all funding by then. So we'll know exactly, we won't be chasing funding and wondering if we can or can't do something.
So the big difference in 1A to 1B or HNTB is that once Kiewit starts designing, HNTB is our technical arm to do an oversight responsibility on the design.
Yeah.
That's a big change from what you've been doing thus far.
Oh, yeah, we
So
haven't reviewed
we're
any
gonna
of
bring
this.
in totally different crew to be able to do that kind of stuff.
I guess, I'm sorry, if I may, I think maybe I didn't ask my question correctly, but when you contracted initially with the port, did you contract for the full scope of work like we're talking about now, with some anticipation of all these different phases, or was it limited?
It was we did not contract for all the phases because we didn't know the delivery method. So we contracted through 2026 to get through one, seeing if we had funding and whether we could get it, and then what kind of delivery method were we going to do. It was always contemplated that it would be an owner's rep all the way through completion of the project. But if we didn't get funding, there wasn't any reason to go past that. And until we knew what delivery method, we didn't know really how to staff the owner's rep contract because each delivery method would have been different.
A little different.
So now that we've evolved to, we've got funding and now we know what delivery method, we can refine what the remaining portions of the contract will look like.
So when we did the competition for the owner's rep, we looked at the entire scope of effort all the way to bridge opening to make sure that each of the companies had the capability and the history of being able to do that kind of stuff. I will say that Mike has done an outstanding job and the trust has been built. That his first year, we gave him X amount of money. He came in quite a bit under that because there was no need to spend those efforts because the project wasn't as mature as we were hoping it would be. So the good news is that he just didn't go out there and spend our money. He spent it wisely.
Yeah, I think the helpful thing when the contracts going to this amendment route, for those of us that may have been here for prior to staging up or now new members, to have it when it leaves the finance committee, do that high level review of like, this was the original, always anticipated portion of the 520. Here's where we are. Here's the change. If this is an increase or reduction, just so we keep the background, because that's the risk in my mind of amendments is like, you lose sight and you just keep chipping away and next thing you know, they're not.
And that's all what we're doing with the cash flow stuff. So our stuff is within that cash flow piece. So when you look at the cash flow, we're divided up into the right of way piece, the management piece, the funding
You
finance.
can see the growth or the.
Yeah, I think just translating that into like H into B, anticipated X million through 2026. Here's where we're at. This amendment would take up X remaining, whatever.
Yeah. We're a piece of that 520, and the cash flow tracking is not just Kiewit, it is the whole project.
Yeah.
So it includes our stuff, lobbyist stuff, legal fees, everything that goes into delivering the project.
Sorry, I didn't mean.
No, great question. Absolutely great question.
And then that was it. Then just the upcoming action items, if there's any questions on those.
So is this tolling policy, is that what we just told this committee to work on? And they're gonna have all that work done by May 1, and have flushed out all the different.
Carrie, are you gonna be done by May?
Not all of the work.
So that new date is
There he
signaled.
is. So Carrie,
Man, I tell you what, I was really hesitating to push my button on that one. No, the answer to your question is we are going to have enough information from you. I hesitate to even say by May 1, but very soon, within the next couple of months, which goes beyond May 1st now. But in the next couple of months, we are going to have enough information to inform the investment grade traffic and revenue study, and we're going to have enough information to inform the start of the development of the concept of operations. And then but by the end, by December, we need to have a pretty good idea. At least the concept of operations has to be fleshed out. We need to know how we're going to collect tolls, and not necessarily to the business rules level, but to the toll policy level. I expect that we will have come back to the board once or twice with different policy recommendations. And then we'll have a concept of operations. And then starting in phase 1B is when we start putting together system requirements and system design to actually build a toll system or design a toll system. We're going to then procure someone to build it for us.
I mean, the good thing is you're not doing something that hasn't been done 100 times across the country.
Yep.
We're just gonna kind of guide you through some of the decisions, give you the pros and cons that you could set your agency up the way you want to set it up, but there's not really that many things that you'll be deciding on.
Yeah, and the port recently wrote out their policy as well. She can look over as a primer.
One thing that I do think for this May 1st timeline, I mean, we're talking about very high level concepts that we need to have down, but that probably includes things like, do we want to toll bikes? Do we want to toll?
I don't think we'll get into that, right, Carrie? That won't be until future policy discussions.
It would inform infrastructure of if those lanes need
If you,
something.
well, yeah, if you want to toll bikes and.
But I don't think I think we've been consistent on assuming we're not, but it might, I think Seth brings up a good point, just for like memorializing that direction. This would be the point to include some statement of like, that's not getting accounted for, build out.
We could do that.
Or at least building the question in, if it's an infrastructure issue, what infrastructure would allow the flexibility later on to either do that or undo it if we choose X version of the, if it's something in the ground, is it something that can be turned off? We don't use it, and then later on you turn it on instead of to dig the ground out.
I would expect we'll be bringing back our list of assumptions or capabilities with the various methods and modes that we can incorporate and what that means for everything else.
Great.
So Carrie, I'm reading the room here that at some point it would be very helpful if your guys would put together a kind of a timeline of the key decision elements. And that could be over the next 3 years. But roughly, when are we going to pin down the first version of the toll rates? And whatever else we need all the way through, so people can kind of see how this piece of the puzzle kind of fits in.
Absolutely. Well, and let me say this, one of the things at least that I would recommend you do is keep your discussion of toll rates completely separate from your discussion of toll policies, as business rules, et cetera. What we'll do, I mean,
virtual emoji. Yeah.
you can toll rates depend on the financial progress and the financial health of your project, and the system that we design and have built for you will be able to collect tolls according to any rate schedule that you develop, and you can change it whenever you want. It'll just be loading a table into the database that the system calls from to know how much to charge a particular vehicle. So we'll build you a system that will be able to do anything you want to do. What we need, though, is some basic parameters to say, do you need to count axles or don't you need to count axles? Those kinds of questions up front.
Are we accepting cash? Are we not accepting cash? All
Correct.
those.
Will you employ toll collectors? Will you not employ toll collectors? Those kinds of things.
Okay, are there any other questions on the upcoming action items? I am not seeing any. I would note that we have the Facebook Live event on March 27th from 5 to 6 p.m. I hope everyone tunes in for that. We also have the April 17th Bridge Aesthetics Committee public open house at Hinkle Middle School from 5 to 7. Our next meeting will be Monday, April 8th, 2024 from 2 to 4. And I would apologize for being remiss in my duties. We are over the 2-hour goal. And I never thought that would happen when Arthur Babbitts is not here. So I'm glad it wasn't an extra hour over.
His stand-in asked the appropriate amount of questions.
Saved us a good amount of time there, Nathan. Okay, with that, with the consent of the governed, I would adjourn this meeting. Thank you all. And thank you for everyone who signed in and listened in. And thank you for your questions, Catherine.
Thank you.